Today's Wednesday, April 23rd, 2025, and today we will welcome Marcel Crok, C-R-O-K, right? From the Netherlands. I think he's in Amsterdam. Is that right? That's
Outside Amsterdam, but
outside Amsterdam. And I just want to
not
congratulate
far.
Marcel. He will tell us his story, but I want to congratulate him for being sort of a one-man CO2 coalition in Europe and just tirelessly working so hard and with such great people and doing such important, fantastic work. So we just want to hear all about it, Marcel, and you could just tell us any stories and whatever you'd like us to know about your work and the things you do there.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot, David, and welcome everybody. So yes, I'm based in the Netherlands, and my background is chemistry, physical chemistry, and after that I became a science writer. I used to write for Scientific American kind of magazine in Holland, in Dutch. So it was a monthly magazine. And back in 25, my editor-in-chief said, "Well, there is something going on with a hockey stick graph. Can you look into it?" And many times I had to do the cover stories. We were a very small team, only four editors, and so I had to write a lot of cover stories, and that was interesting because then I could spend a few weeks on one topic, and in this case, ultimately. I spent 2 months full time working on this cover story about the hockey stick, and I will later show the hockey stick. Let's see, because I am not very familiar. Share,
It's green, yeah. Also, try to get
yes.
your camera to focus on your face a little bit. You're a little blurry.
Can I make it bigger? Yes,
There you go.
yes. Fine like
Yeah.
this. Everybody
Yes.
okay?
Yes. Looks good.
Okay. Okay, so before I continue with the interesting story, I think about the hockey stick, I will give a short introduction because as David said, I'm sort of like the single person CO2 coalition in Europe, and our organization is called Clintel, the Clintel Foundation, and we try to work together with the CO2 Coalition. So Gregory Wrightstone was here in the Netherlands last year to speak at our conference. We also, I have to say, you have the Global Warming Policy Foundation in the UK, which is larger in terms of funding, and they have a lot of good stuff also. So check them out as well. Um, well, this is tonight, of course. So this is me and the hockey stick graph, and I always say that without this graph, I wouldn't be here tonight. I wouldn't be giving this talk because this was really the starting point for me. My editor-in-chief saying, "Look into this," and I did for 2 months, and then I discovered that no, I discovered that two Canadian scientists, McIntyre and McKittrick, Ross McKittrick, Stephen McIntyre. They had looked into this graph for 2 years in the period 2003, 2005. And what they tried to do is, so now I have to say, originally, this graph was published by Michael Mann, an American, a very famous or infamous, how you see it, climate scientist in the US. He published this graph in 1998 and 1999, and it was immediately highlighted by the IPCC report in 2001. And what you see here is the temperature on the northern hemisphere from the year 1000 on the left until now, the year 1998. And what you see is that the climate seems to be stable for more or less stable for hundreds of years until 1900, and then it explodes. It goes up. And of course, what it suggests is that burning fossil fuels radically changed the climate. And this graph was so influential because you could just show it to any politician or any policymaker and say, look at the evidence yourself. The climate was stable until we started burning fossil fuels. Yeah. And so this was the background of all this and why it became so influential in the IPCC report. And then you had McIntyre and McKittrick, and they looked into this graph, and the simple question they had, what is behind it? What are the data behind it? The data were mainly tree ring proxies because before 8050, you don't have measurements with thermometers. So you're looking at the temperature here for 1000 years, but before 8050, you didn't have thermometers. So they used all kinds of what they call proxies, so indirect temperature measurements, and that could be corals or ice cores or ocean sediment. But mainly what Michael Mann used was mainly tree ring records. And well, long story short, what McIntyre and McKittrick discovered after, well, 2 years was that this whole graph was completely, well, it was completely debunked by them. What they showed was that you could, and that was because of two things. There were errors in the data. So Michael Mann had cherry picked the data. So there were only a few tree ring series that had a huge hockey stick shape. And then you had his statistics. And what the statistics was doing was that it promoted those hockey stick shaped tree ring series, you know? So it was mining for hockey sticks, like Steve McIntyre used to say, you know? So you had hundreds, you had 400 or 500 series. Most of the series didn't show anything. It was just like almost noise. And only a few series had this hockey stick shape, but they were highlighted by the statistics. And this was ultimately published by them in Geophysical Research February 2005, on the same day as my article came out, because in the end, we were able to work together. So I told them, as a science writer, I, I want to make a big story. The story was 6,000 words, 12 pages in our magazine. It was published in the Financial Post in Canada on 2 days, because the old newspaper, you know, the big newspaper size, and it was printed on 2 days. And so what happened was that this was my first article on climate ever. I have written about many topics about statins. I need to talk with you about the statins, David. I read your last I read your last newsletter about it. But anyway, I had written about many different topics, but this was really my first article about climate. And immediately I had like a global scoop. I had a scoop, you could say, of this work, debunking the hockey stick. And I was in the middle of the Dutch climate debate, but also the international climate debate. And what happened was really interesting because in Holland, we have the KNMI. KNMI is our National Weather and Climate Institute. It's comparable to NOAA in the US, I would say. NOAA comes closest to KNMI. It's the Met Office in England, and etc. And we had a short quote from the KNMI person, and he said, "Well, this is because I sent him my article, and he said, well, this is a serious issue. Yes, you bet." And he said, we are going to discuss this in Beijing during the next IPCC meeting. And I thought the quote was quite meaningless. You know, yeah, of course, you should discuss this at the next IPCC meeting. But then when my article came out, I was immediately attacked by KNMI in the Dutch media. And I didn't understand. And they were claiming that I misquoted the guy. I misquoted him. And I thought, what did he say? He just said, we are going to discuss this in Beijing. So I really didn't understand. And I had to wait till late 2009. So almost 5 years, almost 5 years later. And what happened then? We had ClimateGate. Is everybody aware? David, do you think everybody is aware of ClimateGate?
Probably half of us are, so you can summarize it.
Okay, so ClimateGate was like a big affair at the end of 2009. Thousands of emails of prominent climate scientists, among them Michael Mann and also Phil Jones from a director of an institute in England. They were hacked, probably hacked, and they were put online. And so everybody familiar with the hockey stick and other climate discussions could read what they wrote to each other behind the scenes, you know. And that was not a story because you could see that they were only trying to excommunicate climate skeptics. They were discussing how can we get them out of the IPCC, even try to get them out of the literature. Those were the games that they were playing, and we the climate skeptic community, we suspected this, but now we had evidence. And
Let me
one
see
of the
hands.
ClimateGate emails.
Put up your hand if you know about Climate Gate. If you've had a yes. Yeah, okay, good. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And what was really interesting was that one of the ClimateGate emails was about my article, my hockey stick article, because my article was available in English for Michael Mann the same day that it appeared in Holland in our magazine. And what happened behind the scenes was that Mann and Phil Jones, the UK director, they sent an email to this KNMI guy writing to him, IPCC is not going to discuss this in Beijing. So this KNMI guy, who was very fond of himself, that he was part of the big IPCC process, came into trouble because of this quote that he gave in my article, and then decided to throw me under the bus, like you used to say in the US, and so did I tell this anecdote because immediately after my first article ever, on which I worked for 2 months, I won. By the way, I won a Dutch award for this article. I was really surprised because even at the time, this article was already controversial, but I won an award, 10,000 euro. It was a big award in the Netherlands for science journalism. So there were a lot of people who acknowledged the value of the work. But at the same time, the official Climate Institute started attacking me straight away. And so, yeah, this is like one of the major teams. I became some sort of, well, the national climate skeptic, and this was in our New York Times, you could say. This is our national left-wing progressive newspaper. And compared to the US, you could say that Holland is always a bit more like we have what we call the polder mentality. And polder mentality means that we always try to keep talking with each other until we get like some sort of consensus and agreement. So this article was written by a former colleague of mine who used to work for the same magazine and later moved to this newspaper. And he was so intrigued by me doing this work all these years. So I'm now doing this for 20 years, like being the national, I'm the most visible climate skeptic in the Netherlands. So they had this profile about me a few years ago in the national newspaper, a five pages profile in the national New York Times. You could say this would never happen in the US. I would say they would never profile David 5 pages in the New York Times. They would ignore him because he is the climate denier, etc. And here the headline is interesting. I am called the super bad guy of the climate debate. I'm the super bad guy. So I think my parents never thought of me like in this way, neither my wife or any of my friends anyway. So for many years I was a freelance science writer because the media didn't want to work with me anymore because of my profile. They said, no, you have too much of an opinion. And I said, of course I have an opinion, but it's based on science. It's very well founded. No, yeah, we want to. Well, of course, every climate journalist has an opinion about the topic, but that's not what should matter. If you write for a magazine or for a newspaper, you have to do. You have to to be balanced. You have to, if you quote an alarmist, you also quote a skeptic, etc. But then they will claim this is false balance, etc. And this is part of the problem. So this problem also exists in Holland, although we have a much more, I would say, a slightly less polarized situation than in the US. But that, in my opinion, is because you have the bipartisan system, and we have like nowadays we have always multi-party governments, four or five parties in the government. So the system is different. Um, so I had trouble making a living for many years because nobody wanted to work with me, etc., etc. And then in 2019, so 6 years ago, we decided to start the Clintel Foundation together with Guus Berghout, who's an emeritus professor of the Technical University in Delft. He's a geophysicist. And since then, it has become slightly easier for me because if you have a foundation with a tax-friendly status, it's slightly easier to raise funds. People would like to donate to your organization. It helps a little bit to work from a foundation instead of as a just as a freelance scientist. So what kind of things do we do? We have a World Climate Declaration, which has the main headline is "There is no climate emergency," and this declaration is now signed by almost 2,000 scientists and experts around the world. David, did you sign it?
I was number 1,000.
Ah, you were number 1,000.
I
Oh
was
yeah, I
exactly
forgot about that.
1,000.
Yeah. So we had an interview with you in the on the website. Yeah, that was great. So if any of your students want to sign, you can go to clintel.org, our website, and you can fill in the form. Um, and so we had 2 years ago, we had John Clauser, the Nobel Prize winner in physics. He also signed the declaration. And what you notice is that it's really important that people like him, with his status, join our community. We really need more people like him because people are very, yeah, sensitive for status and for this kind of stuff. And so. Last year, we also promoted Climate the movie. Did your students see Climate the movie? Did you promote it or?
Oh, yes. We've had Tom Nelson. Sure.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So Tom Nelson came to the Netherlands. You see me and Tom Nelson here on stage, and we organized the premiere in the Netherlands. And as you can see, it was amazing. It was for the first time we had a theater with 600 people. It was completely sold out. And this was like, for me, this was like a breakthrough that more and more people in the Netherlands are like, yeah, I mean, they're a little bit done with the climate alarmism and they are more open now. I think COVID played a very important role there, that people after COVID, they started seeing the government not as a solution, but as the problem. And they see now parallels with the climate agenda.
The problem,
Um,
the problem is the age of the audience. It, it's always the
um,
same. The audience is always
yeah,
always in their 50s and 60s.
that's true, but it is already getting younger, I have to say. I mean,
Yeah.
5 years ago, if you went to a Clintel meeting, it was like uh, the stereotype was like the angry white old man, and it was like 70 plus, 80 plus, and now it's also people like 40 plus, 50 plus, 60
Okay.
plus. So and also you see more women now. 5 years ago, it was like 95% was men and only very few women that came together with their husband, and nowadays we see more mixed population. So that's encouraging, in my opinion. And so you can go to our YouTube channel. I don't know if you can see it, but so Clintel has a YouTube channel, and there you can see the movie and all kinds of subtitles. We did a lot of work on that. There is also a German version now, a German spoken version, a Spanish spoken version, a French spoken version. So we are doing a lot of work promoting this movie together with Tom Nelson. So yeah, before I give a few more examples of about the IPCC, because that is the main theme for tonight. Recently, there was a National Citizens Assembly in the Netherlands about climate, and what they did was they invited 175 citizens from all background, academic to lower education and young, old, white, black, etc. So they had. I think the selection is done fairly because I have spoken a few of those 175 who are really critical, and they contacted me. And there was one day, it was March 8th, and that was the day that they could invite external experts. That was the only day they could invite external experts. Oh, yeah, and the question that they have to answer is how can they improve the climate by traveling, nutrition, and buying stuff? So that is the question that they have to answer. And of course, the politically correct answer is you have to take the train instead of the plane, and you have to eat less meat and more plant food, and you have to buy less stuff. That's what they aim for. And all the experts that are directly connected and paid, because this project cost 6 million euros, and they do everything to organize it smoothly, and the citizens can book hotels, and all the meals and everything is arranged. And on March 8th, some of these 175, they wanted to hear me
What year was this?
because
This year?
just last month.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, and that's the reason why I tell it, because it's very actual, and it has become a big affair. I will explain in a minute. So what happened was that the director of KNMI, and he is on the picture. He is the guy with the yellow what is it, cord around his neck. You see him at the left of the picture in the middle. You see a man with gray hair and a yellow cord. Well, okay, that's the KNMI director, and he had given a presentation during the first meeting, and the presentation is online. And the presentation was very, very one-sided and very, very alarmist. And so I said to some of the citizens that contacted me, I need to talk to you, to the citizens, but also with this guy, because I have to correct a few of the things that he said. And so they arranged this. And so we were in this. You can see me on the picture. So I am also in this group. We are there with the around 20 citizens, because they had many sessions. On that day, they had many sessions. So I was tight. I was tight in my possibilities because I couldn't use slides. I couldn't give a presentation. I only was allowed to answer questions from the citizens. And my main message to the citizens was, the KNMI director, as a person and as a director, he is free to believe or to think that the climate is in an urgent state or in a crisis or whatever. He is free to have this opinion. But as a director of KNMI, he should give you all the relevant information. And he didn't do that. He didn't give you all the relevant information in the presentation because he left out many of the good news that there is around about climate change. And because I was very short, I only gave two examples. I said, we don't see an increase in hurricanes and floods yet. And this is acknowledged by the IPCC. So this is good news that he didn't give you. And mortality, so people dying from extreme weather went down in the past century by 99%. So because of prosperity, we are almost immune for climate change, for extreme weather. And this guy, by the way, his former job was at the Red Cross. So he used to work in this field. He knew everything about this database that is being used in the IPCC, but he decided not to give this information. So that was the information that I gave. And the day went fine. The citizens were very excited about my contribution. And then so and then for me it was all over already. So I just spent the day there, and then for me it was done. But then a few weeks later, the organization phoned me up and said, "Well, yes, for the citizens, it's very hard to judge what is reliable information and what is not reliable. So we decided to do some fact checks." Now you feel it coming. They did a fact check on me, and they fact checked this remark that I made, that we don't see an increase in hurricanes and floods. And I was very confident because in the IPCC report, you know. But then they sent me, they put the fact check online, and what did they say? My statement was false. It was scientifically incorrect. So I became totally crazy. This is like almost like Kafka, the book Kafka, that's the process by Kafka, you know, that's that you are being accused of something that you think, this is crazy. How can I be accused of something that is in the IPCC report? This is totally crazy. And so I complained. I put a long article on my website, and they said, well, we will look into this. And today I received an email. Today I received an email that they now found somebody in the world who is willing to defend them. And so not the IPCC, but he is willing to defend them. And they will probably stick to their fact check. And who is the guy who they found? David, you know him. He is from the US. He's from MIT. It's Kerry
Harry
Emanuel.
Emanuel.
So they found Kerry Emanuel willing to support them and to throw the IPCC report under the bus in order to attack me, the only critical voice during this National Citizen Assembly, you know?
Harry
And I'm
Emanuel
taking
is
this.
the guy at MIT on tropical storms. Dick Lindzen says he's got his own socialist motives for doing what he's doing. He's getting paid very well to run the climate science initiative at MIT. And it's just completely contrary to the National Hurricane Data Center that we've already had a guy from the National Hurricane. He already came a few weeks ago.
Who did you have?
Uh, see, what's the name, everybody? It's not,
Never mind. It's okay. I'm in touch with people like Roger Pielke Jr.,
yeah,
Ryan Mao, Phil
yeah.
Klotzbach.
I can introduce you
They're
to him if you want. He's great. It's just he's had a very good big blog post on how it's really just about attribution, that they just didn't see it in the data before, but now they can detect more. But the
yeah,
hurricanes weren't more before.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I will show some graphs later in my presentation because
Yeah.
it of course it's a very important topic. And so, I was saying we are not yet seeing an increase, and they said false. I quoted from the IPC. This is what the IPC, there is low confidence in most reported long-term trends in TC, tropical cyclones, that's hurricanes, frequency or intensity-based metrics. This is the IPCC report. I quoted the IPCC report when they attacked me. They didn't quote from the IPC report, but nevertheless said that my statement was false. And it is also noteworthy that they didn't find anyone at KNMI. KNMI is our, as I said, is our National Climate Institute. They didn't find anyone there willing to defend them and attack me. And so they had to look abroad for someone willing to do it, you know. And I'm really curious what will happen now. If they didn't put it online yet, but probably they will. And my next step could be a court case because this is such an obvious. I'm being attacked. Don't. I'm taking this very seriously because I'm being attacked by the government. I'm being attacked by the government for spreading misinformation, and what I say is 100% in line with the IPCC report. And this is completely crazy, this situation, you know, and so this is not the end of the story. So maybe I will come back to
Yeah,
your class and explain what.
my biggest problem there is you don't want to use the IPCC report as gospel truth. You know, if you say they're lying most of the time, but they're right when they back me up, Better to get independent data sources than that. That's not a good, credible source.
Yeah, well, okay, you could say that, but
It's
for
their
them,
source.
normally
They're,
they also wrote something on their website. They say that one remark was going against the consensus. It was going against the scientific consensus. And this is completely ridiculous because for them, the IPCC normally is the consensus. And when I quote the consensus, they say that I'm going against the consensus.
right,
So
right.
I mean, at least a judge could see that, okay, if there is like conflicting evidence, they could not say that I was wrong. They should admit, okay, there is conflicting evidence. So what Marcel is saying could be true, but what we are saying could also be true, you know? That's something different. But now they're making a strong claim that my information is false. Okay. How familiar are your students with the IPCC?
We've talked a bit about the origin. I've written about it, but you can go ahead. It's fine. We can all learn.
Okay, because I'm afraid that, well, just say that if it's becoming too long, just say, okay, Marcel, please finish in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then I will
We're
just do that. You
we're
know,
here for you. It's fine.
Okay. Okay, I will give a very short because IPCC is playing a big role in the climate debate. For most of the governments, the IPCC is the Bible, the gospel, and maybe in the US you also have the National Climate Assessment. That's also very important in the US, I know. But in Europe, nobody cares about the National Climate Assessment of the United States. It's not even in the newspapers, you know. It's for us in Europe, it's only the IPCC is what counts, you know. This is really like the global consensus among climate scientists. This is how it is portrayed and how it is used by the governments to back up their climate policies. The IPCC said this is true, so we have to do it. You know, so the IPCC was founded in 1988 by all the countries in the world, more or less. What's interesting, what many people will not realize, is that in their first report in 1990, they said, well, there is some warming, but we don't know if the warming is natural or if the warming is anthropogenic, so caused by the greenhouse gases, you know. But it is also of the same magnitude as natural climate variability. This is in the first IPCC report.
Th-
So in the
th-
first IPCC report, the
This is
IPCC was not.
This is Richard Lindzen.
I don't know if he was involved because
He,
Bert Bolin was the
yeah,
chair. He was very alarmist, but
yeah.
nevertheless, this was in the first IPCC report, and I think it was fair at the time. It was a fair statement. The science was very premature. You know, everybody just became interested in the topic. And then what happened and where it all went wrong, in my opinion, is the Rio conference in 1992. This is the basis for all climate policy. The Paris Agreement that now everybody's talking about and Trump quitted for the second time. The Paris Agreement is just a continuation of the Rio conference in 1992. And what did they say there? They say the ultimate objective of the convention is to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations at a level that would prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. So look what is happening here. The IPCC in 1990 said, well, there is some warming, but it could be natural, could be greenhouse gases. And then the political process in 1992 already said, we have to stabilize the greenhouse gases. Why? Because there is not even evidence that there is a problem or that it is even caused by the greenhouse gases. So what happened was that the political process moved ahead of the scientific process. And this, in my opinion, led to a strong politicization of the science because the next step was that after Rio, they started working on the Kyoto Protocol, which was the first real protocol to international agreement about reduction of greenhouse gases, and it came into force in 2000, no, in 1997. And then in 1995, you had the second IPCC report. And now look at what happened. The second IPCC report in the draft of the report said no study to date has both detected a significant climate change and positively attributed all or part of that change to anthropogenic causes. So this was the final draft. So this is a repetition of the first IPCC report. They still acknowledge that there is warming, but we cannot attribute it. We cannot say that greenhouse gases are the cause of this warming. And this was really problematic because they were working on the Kyoto Protocol. And if there was no scientific evidence, how could they move on with the political process? So then they were in Madrid for the final, when they finalized the summary for policymakers of an IPC report, they have to go through the summary line by line with government delegation. They are sitting in a room for a week, and line by line they have to agree about the summary. And then there was a guy from the US, his name is Ben Center, and he said to the then chairman of the IPCC, I have new evidence that proves that the warming is caused by greenhouse gases. The problem was that his evidence was not yet published in the literature. It was not a peer-reviewed paper. It was his own work, and it was still in the pipeline. And according to the IPCC rules, it was not allowed to implement to use new evidence that was not published in the literature. So, and at the time, it was very funny. At the time, there was still money from the oil companies going to climate skeptics. And one famous climate skeptic was Fred Singer. He passed away a few years ago. He was 90 plus. He was a very eminent scientist in the US. And Fred Singer was in the delegation of Saudi Arabia. So he was like paid by the oil countries, you could say. And he, of course, he objected. He said, I object because this is going against the rules of the IPCC. You cannot bring in new evidence now. And so it became a big fight in Madrid. And when most delegations were already home because their flights, they had to catch their flights, Ben Center and the chairman ultimately decided to change the text. And then when Center was back in his hotel room, he also changed the underlying chapters in the IPC report on his own. And this became a this became the start of I would say this became the start of the climate war in the US. And what happens in the US then becomes the climate war in the Western world, so later in Europe as well. Because what happened only, well, three-quarter of a year later, the report was finally released, and Frederick Seitz, he wrote an op-ed opinion article in the Wall Street Journal, A Major Deception on Global Warming. And this was about the betrayal by Ben Center. And Frederick Seitz and Fred Singer were right. But what happened in the climate community was that every single climate scientist had to choose sides. Do I choose the side of Ben Center, who was a climate scientist working at the National Institute, or do I choose the side of Frederick Seitz and Fred Singer, who were both well-known skeptics, you could say. Yeah. And then what happened was that most climate scientists in the US, they choose the side of Ben Center, and that was the start of the climate. In my opinion, that was the start of the climate war. There was an Australian guy, he wrote a book about this single incident. It's a book, I think it's 500 pages about this single incident in the second IPC report. And he also had interviews with Ben Center. So he contacted Ben Center, and he has also his view on the case. A very interesting story, published by the Global Warming Policy Foundation.
Can I ask a question?
So
Ask a quick question. Is this the second report when they started doing the summary for policymakers first, and then that sort of had a huge influence on the scientific report that came out months later? Was that the
No, no, that never happened. That never happened. No, it's always the same. They have a first order draft, and they have a first draft. It's being reviewed. I was also a reviewer of report. Then you have the second order draft. It's again reviewed. Then a group of scientists start drafting the summary for policymakers. And
Hmm.
this group of scientists is selected from the different chapters.
Hmm.
And then this draft of the summary for policymakers is also sent out to all governments. So then government employees also start to read about the report, and then they meet together.
Hmm.
And but normally, if the governments want to change something in the summary for policymaker that is not in line with the underlying chapter, the chapter authors would object. They say, no, 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 this is impossible.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yes.
is that still the case?
Yes, that's still the case. This is still how it goes. And
Oh, okay.
yeah,
I didn't know.
yeah,
Because the
this
summary for
is really how it goes.
policymakers, the summary is so different from the reports and has been forever.
Um, Nah, sometimes I will give one. I can give you one example about these hurricanes and floods, where in the chapter they give a fair presentation of the science, and then in the summary for policymakers they give a conflicting statement. So it happens indeed. It happens that the summary makes different statements than the chapter, but normally this should not be. This should not be allowed. And we have a famous climate economist in the Netherlands. His name is Richard Toll, and
Sure.
he was part of the summary for policymakers of the working group 2 report. And he
Hmm.
was so annoyed by the process, he found it so biased that
Hmm.
he quit the team. So, and this became an affair. He was interviewed by the BBC a few years later, and now he's like an enemy of the he's seen as an enemy of the IPCC exercise, but it's unfair. He was just complaining about the bias in the summary for policymakers.
Yeah, Richard
So
Lindzen has complained a lot that the summary doesn't reflect the report. And
yes,
there
yes,
are
and
things where
yeah,
the executive summary from the chairman is just, designed for the media and is full of hyperbole and crazy statements, and then it kind of, unpacks during the summary the more you read it, the more you say, well, wait a minute, this isn't in the report, but that you say that that's fairly minimal.
yeah, I wouldn't say that these are the biggest problems. Of
Oh,
course, the summary is like you say, it's like juiced up a little bit, and they're really looking for. I mean, like the hockey stick graph. So we move on to the third report. The hockey stick graph was the opening graph in the summary for policymakers. So in each report, they're looking for some juicy material that they can really hype and that they can use in the press release and the headlines and etc. That's what they do. But this same graph is also in the underlying chapter about paleoclimate. So the graph is in the chapter and also in the summary for policymakers. So it's not like a made up new material, something like that. So that's how. And Richard Lins and another skeptic is John Christie. They were the last well-known skeptics who contributed to the IPCC, and that was in the third IPCC report. After that, no, not a single skeptic has participated. And I spoke to Roger Pielke Sr., is the father of Roger Pielke Jr., and he also contributed to the IPCC, and he told me that it was a complete waste of time because everything he brought in was completely ignored by his colleagues, by the other authors of the chapter. So for him, it was like, okay, if you don't want to listen to me, then for me, it's a waste of time. It's completely so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a matter of groupthink, and that's how I see it now after all these years studying this process. So yeah, we talked about the 2001. So that was really like it was all about the hockey stick, and later, so you get McIntyre McKittrick. This was my article, where I won the award, my scoop. Okay, then we go on to the fourth IPCC report. That was not very remarkable, I would say, but that it was the first report that they started to claim that most of the warming is due to greenhouse gases. So remember, in the first and the second report, they didn't have any idea. Is it really like, is it natural or are the greenhouse gases? And in the fourth report, they're already like very confident. They say most of the warming is due to greenhouse gases. And they will repeat the statements like this in later reports. So then we had this climate gate, yeah, these hacked emails, and I just want to highlight just one example from the emails. There was one um, email about hide the decline. I've just completed Mike's nature trick, and Mike is Michael Mann, the hockey stick author, of adding in the real times to each series for the last 20 years, and from 1961 for keys to hide the decline. Keys is Keith Briffa, and Keith Briffa had a also a hockey stick reconstruction, but his hockey stick, you see it on the right in green, his tree ring reconstruction goes down after 1960. And this was very inconvenient for the what they call themselves the hockey team. This is not my joke, but they call themselves the hockey team. And the hockey team was discussing this in many emails. How are we going to deal with this green line going down after 1960? And they decided to hide it, to hide the decline. And here you see like a spaghetti graph from they also did this in the IPCC. And what they simply did is they cut off the green line in 1960 and didn't show the decline. And this is close to, I would say, this is the closest to fraud, scientific fraud that you can come. And even after ClimateGate, when all these emails were like out in the open, they got away with it. So there were many investigations in the UK, in the US. There were investigations about ClimateGate, and they said, "Well, nothing to see here. Move on." It's crazy. I mean, everybody at that moment, everybody could see this. This is complete. Yeah, it's fraudulent what they are doing there. And you had then suddenly after ClimateGate, you had more gates. There were suddenly the media started talking about errors in the IPC report, mainly in the Working Group 2 report, not in the Working Group 1. Working Group 1 is about the physical science, so what you normally think about when you think about climate. But the Working Group 2 report is about the impacts, and it's far worse. Its content is far worse than the Working Group 1. Working Group 1 is already biased towards warming, making it dramatic, causing all caused by greenhouse gas. But Working Group 2 gets worse, and there were many errors, and one of them was Himalaya Gate. And that was a claim in the IPCC report that in 2035 all the glaciers in the Himalaya would be gone. And that was a claim not from a peer-reviewed paper, but from a popular science article in New Scientist, a British magazine, New Scientist. And so then suddenly everybody started complaining about IPCC, and this was in the early 2010. And that was interesting because then they decided that there should be an investigation, and that was done by the Inter-Academy Council, which is like you have the National Academy of Science in the US, and in many countries you have similar organizations, and together globally they have the Inter-Academy Council. And they, from the UN, they got the task to investigate the IPCC. And they were not allowed to look into the ClimateGate emails. They didn't look at the claims IPCC was making, so they didn't investigate whether the claims were right or wrong. They only looked at the process. Was the process well managed? Was it fair? Did it well, etc. And they had a report, but nevertheless, the report is quite critical about the process. And so there were a lot of recommendations, but one recommendation which was not highlighted by them is highlighted by me is the author selection. In my opinion, this is the only one that's important. The author team for each chapter is intended to have a range of views, expertise, and geographical representations. A range of views is made yellow by me. That's the most important. You need a McIntyre and McKittrick in the chapter about hockey sticks. You need a Richard Linson in the chapter about tropical, about clouds and about cloud feedback, and maybe also Roy Spencer. So if you had like 8 mainstream climate scientists in a chapter, you add 2 skeptics to keep the others honest. and that's all you need. And then when I wrote about this in Holland, then the climate scientist in Holland would say to me, "Yeah, but then we would never be able to write a report." I said, "Well, if that's the case, then you've now proven that you're unable to do a good assessment." Because you have to take into account all IPCC reports have to be comprehensive. And comprehensive means that you take into account all the available evidence, also evidence that's not in your that's not on your side, that may be conflicting evidence, etc. You have to deal with all the relevant evidence, and this is what IPCC is refusing to do, and it has everything to do with the selection of the authors. They select authors who already believe that everything is caused by the greenhouse gases and it's all terrible, and then these people are going to write the next report. So then I wrote my book in Holland, The State of the Climate. And yeah, it's still, I would say in Holland, it's still the only book that's really like dealing in any detail with the IPCC and how it works. Unfortunately, it hasn't been translated into Dutch, then into English. Then you get the fifth IPCC report in 2013, and in this one, climate sensitivity is very important. I guess you have talked about climate sensitivity. Yes?
I've recorded lectures on it, and most of these people have seen it, and we've had discussions, but we're not current on it.
Yes. Okay. So climate sensitivity is the amount of warming you get when you double the CO2 concentration. Yeah. So you double the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. How much warming will that give? And ECS, like you see here, is the equilibrium climate sensitivity. So that means you double CO2, then you have to wait for the system to get into a new equilibrium that takes hundreds of years, because you have the ocean and the atmosphere who has to find a new equilibrium. And then how much warming do you then have? And the IPCC for many years said it is somewhere between 1.5 and 4.5 degrees. And for most reports, they said the best estimate is 3 degrees. But what happened just before they published this report, we had new studies, new evidence based, and so these estimates you see here, 3 degrees, were mainly based on climate models. And you are probably aware of the many problems that there are with climate models. And so very many skeptics were like skeptical about these estimates based on the climate models. And you had a British scientist, he was a new guy. He was retired, he was from the financial, he worked in the financial sector, he retired, very smart, bright mathematician, and he decided to specialize in climate sensitivity. And he started publishing in the literature. His name is Nick Lewis. And Nick Lewis and I, we wrote this report for the Global Warming Policy Foundation, A Sensitive Matter. And the subtitle is How the IPCC Buried Evidence Showing Good News About Global Warming. What was the good news? Well, Nick Lewis showed in many papers, and this is a complicated graph, but I will explain it. In colors, you see different estimates for climate sensitivity. So on the horizontal bar, you see the estimate for climate sensitivity. Yeah. So the amount of warming you get after doubling CO2. And you see that, well, the peak of these curves, that is the best estimate you can get from the observation. So you take the observation, so you take the temperature record since 1850, you make an estimate of what happened in the oceans, and you take what they call the greenhouse forcing. The IPCC publishes estimates of greenhouse forcing. They say, well, CO2 increased like this, methane increased like this, ozone increased like this. And so what is powerful about this approach is that Nick Lewis, in this approach, for 100% accepts everything of the IPCC. He says, well, I accept, for the sake of the argument, I accept everything that the IPCC is claiming. I accept their temperature increase. I accept their the amount of energy that went into the ocean, and I accept their estimate for the effect of greenhouse gases. And with those numbers, you can then estimate climate sensitivity, not from models, but from observations. And that's very interesting, of course, because then you at least you have a check of whether the models are doing anything decent. And here you see that his best estimate for climate sensitivity was around 1.5. And we go back to the 1.5 was the lower bar, the lower range of the IPCC for decades, you know. So now Nick Lewis is saying, based on everything that the IPCC in themselves claims, that the best estimate for climate sensitivity is 1.5. And that, of course, was a huge issue. And the IPCC, as we explain in this report, they decided to bury it in the summary for policymakers. And what they did was, and oh yeah, and here you see that the models on average there are around 30 models nowadays, yeah? And the models on average have a climate sensitivity of more than 3 degrees. And so the observations indicate 1.5, the models 3.4. So this is a big indication that the climate models are really oversensitive, as people like Richard Linson, Ross McKittrick, John Christie, Roy Spencer, so many skeptics, they say this for so many years, the models are oversensitive. And Nick Lewis played also a very important part in this topic. And he is sometimes regarded as a lukewarmer or not even a skeptic because he accepts most of the IPCC stuff. But nevertheless, I believe that his work is still very powerful because it shows that IPCC, even if you ignore, even if you use their own data, they will ignore the outcome. And what they did was really interesting.
Does
Here
he
you see again
actually
in the
accept, does he actually himself, or does he just say, for the purposes of writing this report, I'm going to accept it because everybody accepts it, but does he believe this sensitivity?
This he would be a very interesting person for your class as well, and you could ask him directly. But because
Yeah,
well, he published after our report, he also published a peer-reviewed paper about this. It was published
right.
in
Yeah,
2018
right.
together with
Yeah,
Judith Curry
yeah,
because he publishes a lot on the blog of Judith
yeah,
Curry. So
right.
they published this together. And I know them pretty well, both of them. I visited Nick Lewis many times in his home in the UK.
Mm.
And Nick, I think Nick truly believes it. So he
Really?
goes very far. He goes very far with the IPCC. Judith Curry, on the other hand, doesn't believe it. So for
Yeah,
Judith Curry, there is more room for decadal, multi-decadal internal variability or even centennial internal variability that we don't know yet, etc., etc. You know,
sure.
but Nick
Okay.
Lewis, but nevertheless, I have the fullest respect for him. He published 10 papers. He has done excellent work in the field of climate
Yeah.
sensitivity. So it's a very interesting.
If you compare to Will Happer, it's a different story.
Yes, but
Right.
yeah, but
And
even
Will
Happer
Happer
and
is
Nick.
pretty good at equilibrium sensitivity as well.
Yes, but I mean, even Happer and Nick Lewis respect each other very much. You know, they exchange emails and they have lots of respect for each other. So
Yeah.
so, but yes, this also shows that in the skeptical community,
Yeah.
you have it's not black and white. It's not that in the skeptical community people all agree. You've probably
Right.
seen the discussion with Nat Nikolov, one of the dragon slayers. It's almost a war going on in the skeptical community with this guy, you know, and he's attacking Happer. So it's yeah,
Yeah.
there's
I haven't invited Ned to come talk to us on purpose, but
yeah, okay, yeah, well,
but maybe
anyway.
we will someday just for fun.
Um, okay, so that was the fifth IPCC report, and then we go to the sixth report. So this is the latest report. It was published in 2021, and now you already see that in every single IPCC report there were like big discussions going on certain aspects, you know, and it changed because sometimes people they say sometimes people believe that there is no evolution in the climate debate. But this, if you follow it so closely as I have done for the last 20 years, you see a lot of evolution. You know, it's the topics that they pick change all the time. So in 2001 it was the hockey stick, and but when the hockey stick was debunked, they were looking for something else. And then Katrina happened in 2005, and then they decided, and especially in the US, the climate activists, they decided that they should focus on extreme weather because a global warming of 1 degree or even 2 degrees is not very scary for people, you know, but extreme weather could be scary. I mean, in Katrina, 2,000 people died in New Orleans. So you try to scare people with extreme weather, and they have done so ever since. So extreme weather is still the number one issue, I would say, nowadays when you talk about climate change, because all the other things like sea level rise, we have sea level rise, but it is so slow and it is so linear. There is hardly any acceleration, or there is even no acceleration, you know, and the Arctic is not melting anymore since 2007. It's stabilized again. So all the polar bear is not going extinct. There is even like too much of them nowadays. The Great Barrier Reef is in great shape, according to Peter Ritt, an Australian scientist who was fired for saying things like that by his university in Australia. So there are not many things left that climate activists can use. So the only thing left is extreme weather. And they focus on the 1.5 degrees target from the Paris Agreement, because they can use the 1.5 target by saying that we already have 1.2 or 1.3 degrees Celsius warming. And given the scenarios, we will cross 1.5 in 12 years. So we have only 12 years to save the planet, you know? So these are the main arguments that are now left to the climate activists. Um,
Doesn't it just
I
seem
don't
to you,
know.
it just seems like a novel. It just seems like this is just a dream and it can't possibly actually really be happening.
Yeah,
But it
maybe I
is.
should write a novel.
Yeah.
Let me turn on the light because it's getting dark here.
Okay. And in the
So
summary for policymakers, does the Secretary General of the UN ever write, or is just the chairman of the IPCC who writes the
yeah,
introduction?
that's the chairman of the IPC.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what happens is that after the IPCC did its job, then they will move some headlines. They move it on to Gutierrez, and then he will, I mean, say crazy things like the planet is boiling or whatever. You know, that's of course crazy because the IPCC should do a fact check on him. You know, he is the United Nations boss, and he is claiming all kinds of things that going against the IPCC report. So this is completely crazy. And what is funny nowadays, and this is also my upcoming court case in the Netherlands, is that what you see now is that climate activists, they start ignoring the IPCC reports, but because they think that the IPCC reports are too conservative. People like me, like the skeptics, they can easily refer to the IPCC reports because many claims in the IPCC report are simply good news, like no trend in hurricanes, no trend in floods. That's good news. That is inside the IPCC report. And then we are again attacked for spreading misinformation, although we quote directly from the IPCC. And the climate activists, they completely ignore the IPCC. They make exaggerated claims, and the climate scientists never attack them. They will always let it go. So they can make all kinds of unsubstantiated claims that are going against the IPCC, and they get away with it, you know. But this is the funny situation because now climate scientists, they should also choose sides. Do I stick to the IPCC and do I start attacking the climate activist, or do I, yeah, most of them keep silent. This is what happens all the time. And this is this is a big deception, of course, that climate scientists don't stand up for the science, and they are all afraid for the funding, for the job, etc. And they keep quiet all the time, and this is very disturbing. Um, I have many slides about this AR6, but I think it's too much. But what I want to say is, that what we did, and we are the only group in the world this time with 10 people, with 8 people from our network, and you see Ross McKittrick there, and Scafetta, and Andy May, and your hero Javier Binos, because you love his book. His 2 books are really great indeed. So with this team, we analyzed the latest IPC report, and um, oh, what I wanted to show our book, but no. Well, our book came out. It's called "The Frozen Climate Views of the IPCC," and Andy May and myself, we were like the editors and we also wrote several chapters. And I want to highlight. I want to skip through this. Um, because one chapter is about the hockey stick, and so IPCC, many reports after the hockey stick was debunked in 2001. I told you this story. They decided to publish a new hockey stick. It's here on the right. And now they claimed even that it's the warmest, that we are now in the warmest period in 100,000 years, you know. And in our chapter, we explain that this is probably untrue and not backed by the evidence. And we show, Javier Vinos wrote this chapter, but many times I show this picture. This is a wonderful example. This is a Swiss glacier. It's retreating. You see 8056, 9022. The glacier is retreating. And many people, of course, will say, look, Marcel, look at this. The glacier is retreating. It's all due to us. It's all CO2. Swiss, Swiss researchers went to this area and did field work. And what they find is sometimes they find remains of trees. And what is nice about trees is that you can date them very exactly. You can date them by the year. So you know exactly in which year the tree was there. And based on this field work, they made a reconstruction of how this valley in Switzerland looked like 2000 years ago. And I did in Holland, I did special high school where you learn Latin and Greek. And when I learned Latin, I learned about Hannibal. Hannibal went over the Alps, and he went to Rome, and he attacked Rome. So with his elephants he went over the Alps. And now when you see this reconstruction, you understand why, because it looked like this. It looked like this. 2000 years ago, there was no glacier, and the tree line was much higher, because nowadays you don't have any trees in this area, and back then you had trees high up. And so and you can find examples like this all over the world. But the IPCC is saying that the medieval warm period, this is how they call it, and that was dated like 1000, the year 1000, when the Vikings went to Greenland and started settling there, and they had agriculture there. And they will say, the IPCC will say, well, this is a regional phenomenon. So it was Greenland, but now it's also Switzerland, and we can see it in many mountain areas in the US. And this week, that's very interesting. This week, there was a very interesting paper in Nature. They now found moss in East Antarctica. This is a paper actually in Nature. Normally Nature is very climate alarmist, but this is a paper in Nature showing strong evidence for a medieval warm period in Antarctica. And so it becomes clearer and clearer that the medieval warm period was global and not a regional phenomenon. And that means that the hockey stick is just rubbish. It's rubbish. And that's what I was writing here, that I refer to, I refer to George Orwell, 1984. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. And what IPCC is doing is they are controlling the past, and yeah, by publishing this hockey stick. And it's rewriting history. What they are doing there is rewriting history. And so in my 90 and George Orwell IPCC style is warm is cold. So it was warm in the past, but you say it was cold. And this is one of the examples from our book. I will go through this. This was the sea level. Hiding good news. We talked about that. That's important. Gutierrez, we are on a highway to climate hell. But where is the climate hell? This is from Roger Pielke Jr. This is from the IPCC report themselves. They do detection and attribution. Detection means that a change is detected. And you're looking at all kinds of extremes. And so IPCC claims that heat waves and heavy precipitation have a change has been detected. But look at the very important flooding, drought, meteorological drought, hydrological drought, tropical cyclones. And flooding and cyclones are most important in terms of damage. Globally, 90% of the damage we have from extreme weather is from flooding and from hurricanes. Globally, if you have a big hurricane in the US, you see it dominating the global damage in that specific year. So 2005, last year, you had some very big hurricanes, a lot of damage. You see it being dominating in the global disaster losses. And so this is good news from the IPCC report. You can see it from yourself, Klotzbach. I mentioned him. Landfalling hurricanes in the US, no trend. This is from Ryan Mao. You can go to his website. He is updating this all the time. Here you see simply the number of hurricanes globally. And you saw a lot of variability, no trend. And this is the intensity of the hurricanes. You also see a lot of variability and no trend. And this should not be controversial. They should not claim that my statement about this is incorrect. This is Everybody can clearly see it, even in the data. You don't even have to look in the IPCC report. Just look at the data. The fact checkers didn't show any data when they said I was wrong. I showed this data on my blog to defend myself. Flooding, there are no graphs about flooding, but this is like IPCC, you know. In summary, there is low confidence in the human influence on the changes in high river flows on the global scale. This is very like normal people. But here they say nothing to see here, no trends in floods, no trends in floods. Now this is what they're saying here, you know. And when I then say to the national to the citizen in Holland, there's no trend in floods, they say, oh, this is incorrect. This is the crazy thing that we are dealing with. Um, cherry picking, of course, this is the final example that I will give, and then maybe some questions, and then okay, this of course is very important. What are they cherry picking? This is a hurricane in Miami in 1926, and you see a lot of damage, but you also see that Miami had very few houses. The population was very low, not many people living there. So this hurricane, of course, had a lot of damage. But if you compare, if a similar hurricane like in 1926 would hit Miami today, of course you would have a lot more damage because you have more people, you have more property, and the property has more value. So if you want to compare the 1926 with the 2024, then you have to make like a normalization of the data, yeah, before you can compare these. And this is what they did in the literature. Roger Pielke Jr. and Chris Lancy were two very important. They published a paper in 1998. And so there is a lot of literature on this. And Roger Pielke Jr. is the expert in the world, I would say, on this topic. And so this is from Roger Pielke Jr. This was a study highlighted by the IPCC on the left, normalized US hurricane damage, and it shows an increase. And this was a paper by Pielke himself and by Chris Lancy from the Hurricane Center, and it shows no trend in normalized damage from hurricanes. They cannot both be true. One has only 25 citations, the other one has 1,200 citations. What happened in the IPCC report? They highlighted the one with the 25 citations and they ignored the one with the 1,200 citations. It becomes worse. In a peer-reviewed paper by Pielke himself, he showed this list of 52 studies And of those 52, they all look at normalized damage from flooding, from hurricanes, sometimes in the US, sometimes in other parts of the world. You see China, Europe, Spain, etc., you know. And from these 52 studies, just one of them said there was a detectable trend in damage going upward attributable to CO2. And that was the one shown here. That was the one highlighted here. All the 51 other studies didn't show any attributable trend to CO2. So they say sometimes there are changes, but the changes has nothing to do with CO2, but has to do with change of population or change of land management or whatever, you know? So this is, again, this is very good news. And what the IPCC did, they ignored the whole list except the single one that highlighted that showed an increase due to CO2. And that's really that's a form of cherry picking that even for me, I've seen a lot of bad stuff happening in IPC reports. This even for me, this was remarkable. This is so obvious. Even if you are a fan of IPCC, you should acknowledge that this is crazy. This should not be the case. If you look at global disaster losses after you normalize the data, this is from Roger Pielke, you see no upward trend. You see a slight downward trend. And here you see what I mentioned before. 2005 was Katrina dominating the global disaster losses, you know. So hurricanes in the US are a big part in global hurricane losses. And I want to finish with this report was written by Donna Laframboise from Canada for the Global Warming Policy Foundation. The hounding of Roger Pielke Jr., I'm not very familiar with the word hounding. I'm not a native speaker, as you can hear, but the essay is excellent. It shows how the climate community treats somebody like Roger Pielke Jr. And you have to realize that he is not a climate skeptic. I'm a climate skeptic. I say that okay, the effect of David is even a climate denier, I would say. You know, I'm a climate skeptic, he is climate denier. No, so we are skeptical about CO2 being the main cause, having a big influence on the climate, having a high climate sensitivity, etc., etc. Then you are a true climate skeptic. Roger Pielke Jr. says, no, no, no. There is a climate problem. It's caused by CO2. We have to do something about it. He even published a book called The Climate Fix. It's about climate policy. It's one of the best books about climate policy. It's already a little bit older. I think it was published in 2009, but it's still a very good book. If you want to learn about climate policy, I really recommend it. The Climate Fix. Um, but what happens to it? But he at the same time he's saying we should stick to the science. We should not exaggerate the science. We should be honest about the science and especially about extreme weather and about disaster losses because that's his specialty. And they really treat him like Voldemort from the Harry Potter movies. And this is a quote I got from Roger Pielke himself. I every now and then communicate with him. And he said, I was nominated to participate in the SREX report. This is a special report, a special IPC report. As one of the most published and cited authors on disasters and climate change, I was not selected. And a US government colleague told me that an IPCC official had told him that Roger Pielke will never participate in the IPCC. Not only did he say that, but it has been true. You know, so this is what is going on even in the US, because you would expect that in the US there would be, because of the bipartisan system, there would be a little more balance in like selecting authors for the IPCC. But apparently in the US, the selection of IPCC authors is also completely dominated by the Democrats. And therefore also in the US there are no climate skeptics involved in the IPCC, and most of the climate skeptics don't even want to be involved because if they work with them, their input is completely ignored. And I think we leave it at that because I can talk for, as you can hear, I can talk for 3 more hours, and maybe there are some questions.
So Chris, you want to Chris Lancy is the person he came and talked to us a couple of weeks ago.
Ah,
Uh,
okay, yeah, he's excellent. Yeah, I saw him speaking at Heartland once when I was at one of the Heartland conferences.
shall we leave the slides up for questions or take the slides down? Does anybody want to see us?
Whatever you want, whatever you want.
Anybody have a
Maybe.
question about us? Take them down. Okay, yeah. Okay, so stop share
Yes,
so we
okay.
can see each other. And anybody who has a question, raise your hand. I will call on Nigel.
I just unmuting. Marcel,
Stop
thanks very.
share, Marcel. Stop share will be a small red. Look for a little red. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
somewhere.
Did I not stop sharing?
No.
Oh, I don't see it anymore.
Look at the
Um,
very bottom, maybe. At the very bottom, might say stop share. Very bottom, maybe.
um,
You don't see
I
a
don't
little
see it.
red, a little red. I can stop you from sharing, probably.
Okay. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, I see it. I see
See
it.
it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
Nigel.
It was at the top, not at the bottom in my
Oh,
screen.
okay.
So anyway, yeah.
Marcel, hello. It's Nigel speaking. Um, yeah, I really do think you could have carried on for a few more hours. Your enthusiasm certainly
Yeah, yeah,
comes
yeah.
through.
Sorry about that.
No. That's not what I was. That wasn't the point of mentioning it. Um, Presumably, can I firstly, are you familiar with the Overton window?
Yes, I recently heard about it from Benny Peiser, from the until recently director of the Global Warming Policy Foundation. He mentioned it in a lecture he gave in Holland last November. Yeah.
Okay. Well, my question is, when do you think the ground of the Overton window will sort of move sufficiently to get this subject or allow this subject to be more widely discussed? And I ask because I have a pretty small circle of friends, and it's just not right. The timing is not right. There's no point talking to them. They're just not ready to accept the discussion. And that's the question I was wanting to put to you.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I think I'm going to repeat what Benny Peiser would answer to this question. Benny always says that what happens at the moment, and I fully agree with, and that you confirmed that already, is that it's too early to discuss even climate science with your friends, because the science is settled and it's almost a religion, If you criticize the climate science, it's almost as if you talk to religious fanatics, And what Benny is saying is that first we have to focus on the climate policy. So what happens in the UK? I guess you are from the UK.
Yes.
Yes. What happens in the UK is that people are now more open to criticism on climate policies. The global warming policy, they have Net Zero Watch, website you could follow. And when you start nowadays, if the Global Warming Policy Foundation will say in a press release, CO2 is not to blame for climate change, they will never be invited by the BBC. They were on a blacklist by the BBC actually. But nowadays, they are interviewed again on the BBC when they talk about net zero policies. So when they criticize the policies, they are allowed to talk on even the BBC. But when they talk about climate change itself, they are blocked everywhere. And so the Overton window is already shifting in terms of the climate policy. People are getting annoyed about the climate policy because it's hurting them. It's hurting them in their pocket, in their wallet, and they see all these windmills and etc. They see all the problems, heat pumps, obligationary heat pumps, all this kind of stuff. People get annoyed about that, so the Overton window is shifting there first. And when that happened, then we can start talking about climate again. At the moment, it's impossible. In Europe, it's impossible to talk about climate. You're completely, it's yeah, you're completely blocked, excommunicated. And the situation is different in the US, especially under Trump, of course. But in Europe, it's like it's impossible at the moment.
Rachel.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for Marcel. That was a fabulous talk. When you mentioned the part where they'd ignored 51 papers and just picked the one that was supporting what they want to do, is that in every AR report, or was it the latest?
That was in the latest.
The
Yeah.
latest, okay.
But it was a very important topic. So it was the topic disaster losses. And of course, they're claiming all the time in the media that we have more climate disasters, we have more damage, etc., etc. And this is true. We have more damage. But when you normalize the data, when you correct for GDP, when you correct for population and GDP, there is no trend left, as I showed in this slightly downward graph. And they completely ignored almost all the literature on this and claimed the opposite. And this is really a big error on their side.
Okay, thank you. I've just finished writing a book, and part of it does cover climate. So, but I think this is so important; it needs to go in. So I shall add that.
Please
I shall quote
contact
you
me
as
if you.
well.
Yeah. And I can send you a PDF of our book, The Frozen Climate Views of the IPCC, and then you can check
That would be
the
brilliant.
chapter.
Yes,
I
thank
wrote,
you.
I wrote,
It's on,
I
you can
wrote the
just
chapter.
download it from the site, no? Clintel.org.
Yeah, but it's hard to find. So
Okay. Yes, if you could put the link in the chat, that would be brilliant. Thank
Yeah,
you.
sure. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
In my view, it is never okay to talk about monetary damage because that's not weather, that's not climate, that's not nature. That's just humans putting expensive stuff in the path. And so I think it's just a ruse, it's just a tool to if it comes out that it's gotten more expensive, then you use it. And it's something you can show people and they believe it, but it has nothing to do with natural systems.
Yeah.
I
I
want,
think, yeah, Roger Pielke Jr. Agreed with you. He says if you're interested in climate trends, look at climate data.
yeah, I
But
wouldn't
on
address
the
it.
same,
You
yeah, but
know,
on the same time, if there would be, if there really would be an increase in the number of hurricanes or in the intensity of hurricanes, it would also need to show up in the damage. And so you can also look at the damage and well, if you do that in a fair way, you don't see any increase in damage, exactly like you expect, because there is no increase in hurricanes either. So
but you could put expensive stuff right in the way of one hurricane. It only takes one hurricane to cause $1 billion of damage. So that's just not a natural phenomenon.
yeah,
That's
he
that's an
agrees. He
economic
agrees with you.
it's an
Yeah.
economic argument. I want to ask if you'll go back with us for a minute and talk a bit about Maurice Strong. Can you tell us anything about him and the origin? Because you left him out.
Um, I I don't know too much about him, but of course
Hmm.
he played an important role in the early days. He was a guy from the oil industry. He made his money in the oil industry, and he was selected by the UN to lead this process, but more the political process. In my talk, I focused on the IPCC, which is the scientific part, and many people, of course, mix this up because you have the UNFCCC, and this is the political process that is organizing these yearly conferences of the parties, the climate conferences, and then you have the IPCC, and the IPCC is a scientific process. Many people also believe that IPCC has a lot of money, but this is not true. IPCC has very little money. It has a very small office in Geneva at the building of the World Meteorological Organization. And in principle, everybody working on the IPCC report should do it in his own time. So as a volunteer, people are not paid to do it. If they would ask me, Marcel, you know it, you always know it better. So please join us and become a lead author of the next IPC report. Then I had to do it in my own time as a volunteer.
Right.
But normally what happens in practice is that if somebody from NOAA or from a US university or from KNMI in our country, if somebody is selected to become a lead author, it takes a lot of time to contribute. Then normally his boss will say, "Oh, we are very proud that we have a lead
Right.
author of IBC, and we allow you to spend two
Right.
days of the week."
Right.
So that in practice, many governments keep paying these people, and so they don't have to do it in the evenings and in the weekends and in the holidays. But it's not true that a lot of money is involved in IPC. This is a misunderstanding. And the UN FCCC process, so the political process, is quite separated, I would say, from the scientific process. Of course, they need the scientific process to as the foundation for the policy. But that has
Do
long
you
been
know, do you know their budget, the IPCC budget?
I don't know exactly, but I mean, I think they're only so what happens now? One of the co-chairs, they're now working on the seventh IPC report, which has to be released in let's say 5 or 6 or 7 years. It takes longer and longer and longer because these reports become thicker and thicker and thicker. Each report is now 1,500 pages or even more. It's
Yeah.
crazy. And so what the co-chair of the working group 2 report is now a Dutchman named Bart van der Hurk. And he is working at a technical university in Delft. And so what we saw in the Netherlands is that suddenly their budget has been increased by 25 million. And many people ask me because so their budget is normally 50 million and suddenly they got an extra 25 million. And people start asking me, what's going on there? This is politics. And because they also publish exaggerated claims about sea level rise, this institute. And I said, no, 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 no. They are now, he is now the technical support unit for this working group 2 report. And to organize this technical support unit, they need some money because they need to hire people for many years, and so they need money for that. But it's relatively small money. I
But
mean, this
it's
is
Dutch taxpayer money.
yes. In this case, it's Dutch. Well, the U.S. paid a lot of this as well,
I
and
know.
I mean, Trump could really make a difference by stop paying for IPCC, but also stop paying for the UNFCCC,
Yeah.
this yearly climate
Yeah.
conferences. Because what happens there is that 25, 50,000 people fly in to
Yeah.
meet with each other, but
Right.
many of these flights and hotel costs are paid by the US people, because I think the US pays most to this process.
What can you tell
So
us about Dutch climate policy in particular and climate politics? Because we know a lot about UK, and we know there's a guy named Ed Miliband who is trying to single-handedly destroy the English economy.
yes.
What do you have somebody similar in Holland?
In a sense, we have because nowadays our liberal party, but not liberal, not in the democratic. Liberal in Holland is more like more right wing. It's more like a right wing liberal party. Let's say like more like free trade and stuff like originally,
Okay.
But nowadays there are
Classic liberal.
classic liberal, yeah, that's what I was looking for.
Mhm.
But nowadays, this party also became very pro-climate, pro-everything, and they are like progressive, left-wing, etc. And we now have a Ministry of Climate. This
Ah,
is also like this is we and this is at the normally this was the Ministry of Economic Affairs, and now
ah,
it's called the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate.
it's
And
George
so
Orwell.
we have a lady from this classic liberal party, and she is the minister. And so, as a minister of climate, she has to reach our climate targets. And we have a climate law. We have a Dutch climate law, and the law says that in 2050 we should be zero. So this is net zero in the Netherlands. And we also have
Whoa.
a European climate law, and it says the same. So Europe and Holland has to be net zero in 2050. We have ETS, European Emission Trading System. You know, so the companies in Holland already has to deal with the ETS. But on top of that, the Minister of Climate is attacking Dutch industry. And so Dutch industry has to pay CO2 tax on top of ETS. And so the energy prices in the Netherlands for the industry are, I think, three to five times higher than the US. And so the situation in Holland and Europe, in Germany, is far, far worse than the situation in the US. And even Trump already declared an energy emergency. But you are self-fulfilling. I mean, you have a with shale gas. We have no shale gas here. We have a ban. We have a European ban on shale gas. It was not allowed. The Americans, in my opinion, sorry about that, but the Americans blew up Nord Stream. And Nord Stream was owned by Germany and also the Netherlands. And so we had to suffer losses of several hundred million euros because Nord Stream was blown up. We were not allowed, because of the war, we were not allowed to buy gas from Putin anymore. And now we have to buy LNG from the US, which is three to five times more expensive. In Holland, this is also insane. We have the biggest gas field in Europe. In Groningen is in the north of the Netherlands. We have the biggest gas field. And so we have our own gas, which is excellent. So we have very few nuclear because we had free gas on our own country. And we are using this since the 60s. We are also selling a lot of it far too cheaply, by the way. But we had a brilliant position. And what happened, because of the gas drilling, there were small earthquakes in the area. And because of the small earthquakes, you have earthquakes with a force of 2 to 3 on the scale of the earthquake scale.
Richter scale. This is a small earthquake. Yeah.
It's very, very small. But many houses in this area are damaged by these small earthquakes. And now the people there, so what we should have done is that we should have given money to the people there. Okay, here is money, you can repair, you can renovate your house, or make it even stronger for the next earthquake, that we should have done that. And now, after the Paris Agreement, the environmental activists, the climate activists, they have a very good lobby in the government, and they said, well, we have to get rid of fossil fuels anyway, and we have these earthquakes, so we should stop drilling for gas. So last year, they had a new law where they put concrete in all the drilling pipes so that we can never reopen the gas field. This is now official. This is now the official policy. They are now closing for eternity the gas field, and there is still for 500 billion euros of gas inside the field. And now we have to buy the gas from you, David, in the US, LNG.
Scary.
It's completely nuts. It's completely nuts. And so energy prices went up. For households, energy prices doubled in the last 5 years. And especially the small enterprise, many small enterprises, even bakeries, like a bakery has a lot of energy, uses a lot of energy for the ovens. And many bakeries went bankrupt in the last few years because they couldn't afford they couldn't make the bread 2 times more expensive because people wouldn't buy the bread anymore, and so they went bankrupt. It's completely crazy.
Okay, Corin, please.
Yep. I wanted to ask a question about this hurricane and other damage. I was reading in Venus that, say, in what's he called, Danskard-Oeschger events, you can get a rise in temperature of 9 degrees in 100 years. It's extreme.
Or 12 is the highest I've heard of 12. In 100 years.
Okay, so but not 12. Okay, 9 or 12.
Yeah.
So you might expect with a temperature rise that quick, that you would get a lot of storms and disequilibrated behavior, if you like. Is there any evidence of that? Because if there is, it might help destroy the Katrina type narrative.
I
You're
honestly,
you're
I really don't know. Maybe David knows from the book, but I'm still reading his book, so I haven't gone through it completely. So, what did he say
temperatures
about it?
temperatures went up roughly similarly from about 1650 to 1750, about the
Okay.
same 1.5 degree thing. And there, there is a lot of uh, it's all just normal. Are you asking if there's some evidence that this is somehow unnormal or out of normal range?
Yeah, I'm saying that. I mean, so on the evidence of say those events, or for that matter, there was a time when CO2 was 8,000 parts per million,
Yeah.
and so I don't see the argument for CO2 or temperature rises causing hurricanes, and I don't see why anybody
Right.
else should see it.
Right. Right. We had Chris Lancy, and he thinks it maybe will have something to do with the power of hurricanes in the future, but he hasn't seen it yet.
No. So this is very interesting because
Good.
as you so ably pointed out, this seems fairly true, but there's a huge amount of lies, politics, denial, and money involved. And it seems from your excellent and brave presentation that that does sometimes influence the science.
It's all made
So
up. It's all made,
it
all of
seems
it. There's
it
no
seems that
science.
way. It seems that way. It's very difficult to believe, but it seems that way.
It is. Okay, I want to ask Marcel a few more things. First of all, um, I've asked Annie Mae this, and I want to understand if you know anything about why there are so many Chinese researchers with their names on the IPCC documents now in the science documents. Because my belief or my hypothesis is that the Chinese government is putting money into these research institutions to participate in the IPCC, mostly as controlled opposition, just as a way to get more influence in the IPCC process, the same way that they do in many other, in the WHO and biodiversity. This is just their way of doing things. Do you know anything about the Chinese?
No, you should ask Willie soon.
He
He
knows?
has a lot of, he is, no, well, he has, at least he has a lot of, I mean, yeah, my background is science journalism, and of course, I have been interviewing a lot of climate scientists throughout the years, but I'm not directly a scientist, and
Yeah,
so I don't work together with Chinese scientists. And
yeah.
I've been traveling to China twice, but that was long before I entered the climate field. But I would say that your hypothesis makes a lot of sense. I think this is what they would normally do,
Yeah.
and also somebody like Lord Monckton. Lord Monckton would also strongly agree with you that Lord Monckton sees the whole climate agenda as a communist coup. So and this is even the reason that Benny Peiser from the Global Warming Policy Foundation don't want to work with him, because he is too outspoken in this direction, and that could also damage the Global Warming Policy Foundation, because he will start a talk. He's excellent. His talks are excellent. You can find some on.
I can't stand the guy. He does not
No?
under
Okay.
he does not understand the science. I've spent so
Okay.
much time with him, and it's just useless.
Yeah. Okay.
It,
Well, that's also
it's
a
because I think
personal.
Javier and Andy May know what's going on, and I think Chris with his feedback theory just doesn't get it.
I think Lord Monckton also has a very good, well, he has a lot of experience. Don't underestimate because he's a networking guy, you know.
Yeah, oh yeah,
Look, Andy May and Javier Vinos are not networking people. They are
that's
just
right.
like retired people
That's right.
spending all their time behind their computer at home.
That's
But
true.
Lord Monckton had a lot of contact with governments. He had contact with the Australian government, British government,
Yeah.
etc., etc. So he has a good grasp of what's going on inside many companies and governments, etc. So
Yeah.
don't underestimate the
Well,
guy.
he's
But I
overconfident.
can understand why you can stand him. I mean, he's a very peculiar guy, and he likes to talk. He likes to talk a lot. So.
He's bombastic. You know
Yes,
that
yes,
you know
yes.
that word.
Yeah.
He thinks that he's
Those he will start, and then we stop talking about him. He will start a talk, those bloody climate communists, and then he will go
yeah,
on
yeah,
for
yeah.
2 hours, you know.
All right. If I have one last question, anybody else have a last question? Anybody? Nigel, go ahead.
Yeah. Marcel, yeah, just one quick one. Could you explain what the funding is behind Clintel? Any sort of special interest groups that are involved in any way?
Well, it's a good question. I would say we have very limited funding. Our total funding is nowadays about slightly more than 200,000 euros a year. And the funding is coming from citizens, exactly people like you. And we have friends of Clintel. People pay 100 euros a year and they become friends of Clintel. And we have some private citizens who have more money and give us a little bit more, but then you talk about 5,000, 10,000 at most. And so we really have, yeah, a very limited budget. We get no money from the government, no money from what we in Holland we have the postcode lottery, and they have millions from the lottery, and they give it to good causes, to NGOs, but they give nothing to us, really nothing to us. And we are paid by the oil industry, but I never saw 1 euro from them on my
Right.
bank account.
Right.
And so yeah, so it's really hard. I would say it's really hard because I mean, David knows about this. It's very hard to find money for the counter narrative in climate because many donors are really hesitant to donate because even when people find out that, let's say that somebody gave us 1 million, a rich guy gives us 1 million, and then the media finds out, they will expose him and they will say, "Oh, this guy is a denier and he's funding these bloody deniers, etc., etc." So then you give 1 million, and instead of getting like some credits, you get all the public naming and shaming. So people are very hesitant
Yeah.
to fund the other side,
Well, the
and
expert
I
on this
think.
is Greg
Yeah.
Wrightstone. He has accomplished miracles in the funding department.
Yeah, apparently, of course I discussed this with him last year when he was here in the Netherlands, and yeah, he has had some success there. But even then, you talk about 4 million now that they raise a year in the U.S., and the U.S. is how many inhabitants? 300
It's
million. Holland is
huge.
only
It's
18.
huge.
Yeah,
That's
Holland is, and the US has a long tradition of funding groups, foundations, etc. And Europe far less. In Europe, it's far less normal to donate to
yeah,
NGOs,
yeah,
etc. So
yeah.
so fundraising is much harder here in Europe than it
Yes.
is in the US.
Yeah.
By the way,
Well,
Clintel, because of this, Clintel also has a 501(c)(3) in the US
ah,
under the name Climate Intel, because the guy helping me in the US was afraid that if he used the name Clintel, that the Biden administration would Google and then they would block it. So
ah,
we have a 501(c)(3) under the name Climate Intel.
uh-huh.
You can find information on our website about this. Yeah.
Tell your American friends it's tax deductible.
Yes.
Okay, last question. I do not want an answer that lasts 3 days. Just
Okay.
a reasonable answer. it seems like the Dutch government has set their sights on nitrogen and farmers and practically really beyond CO2, simply trying to commit suicide. Can you put any of that in context for us? Because when I hear things like nitrogen, I just think, okay, how could this, is this reality? Is this really
It's
happening?
yeah, it's well, it will take me 2 minutes, but it's completely crazy. It has, first of all, it has nothing to do with the climate issue.
Well,
It's
what is
it's
it first? Help us understand what it
okay.
is.
Okay, so here's the story. So back in the 80s, we had acid rain. We all know about acid rain, you know? We had acid rain and all the forests would die because of acid
Right,
rain.
right,
And acid rain was partly nitrogen, you know, was nitrogen oxide and ammonia was partly, and for the rest was sulfur dioxide, etc.
right.
Then people found out in the US and in Europe, okay, the forests are not going to die. So this acid rain disappeared from the public, you know. But then in Holland, what happened is that they changed the narrative a little bit. And they said, because they wanted somehow, they apparently they wanted to attack the farmers. And they said, well, nitrogen is still a problem because it's bad for biodiversity in general. So they changed from forest to biodiversity in general. And so now, since then, since the late 80s, the claim in Holland is that the nitrogen, farmers are emitting nitrogen. They are emitting ammonia and they are emitting NOx. Yeah. And so the government started claiming that these nitrogen substances from the farmers would be deposited in nearby nature areas and would there hurt biodiversity. So they would destroy nature. And so they
If I
started.
understand correctly, Marcel, this is runoff from the fields from nitrogen fertilizer. Is that correct? It's running into
Well,
the water
no,
system?
yeah, no, I mean, if you have a cow, you have a group of you have cows in a stable, yeah, and the cows they are shitting and pissing, etc. And from that,
Uh,
you get ammonia emission, and part of
yeah.
the ammonia emission will go out of the stable and will go into the environment, you
Hmm.
know, and they still don't know how far it will spread, but we nowadays believe that within a few kilometers it will already fall down on the ground in a dry deposition. They call it dry deposition. But here
Mm,
it comes. Dry deposition has never been measured, and it
mm,
is only modeled. And so they introduced a model. And when a farmer wants to build a new staple, he needs a permit. And
mm,
before he gets a permit, he has to do the calculation with the model. And then the model will say, no, if you buy this staple, you will deposit too much nitrogen on the nearby nature area, so we will not give you the permit.
mm,
And this is the nitrogen crisis because the
mm,
farmers then did everything that the government, for example, we introduced in Holland, we introduced what is it? A nitrogen injection. So fertilizer, the fertilizer, the manure injection. So before they were just spreading the manure on the ground on top of the ground. Shortly before it started raining, they would go with the tractor and they would spread the manure on the ground to fertilize the soil. This was forbidden. In the early 90s, this was already forbidden, and the farmers had to introduce a manure injection. So they have
uh-huh,
to inject the manure in the ground. They needed to hire specialized companies for that because the equipment is too expensive for them to buy
uh-huh,
themselves.
uh-huh,
So this became like we have a bank who specialized in all this stuff. So
uh-huh.
they're part of this. And so the farmers, for 25 years, the farmers did everything that the government asked them to do. And so they didn't stop farming. That was, I think, that the government hoped that all these regulations that the farmers would simply quit. But the
Ah,
farmers did everything. And then a few years ago, the government said, you are still to blame for the nitrogen crisis. And then the farmers became really angry because they said, we invested billions in all the regulations that you came up. We did everything that you asked, and now we are still to blame for this? No way, we are not going to accept it. And so this is, and I tried to explain it to Will Hepper when he was in Holland. He couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
This is completely nuts. But they use it in the Netherlands to kill the farming. Actually, they want to kill farming, and I think this is part of the UN. This is part of the UN plan. There is a UN agenda that half of the earth should be rewilded. Rewilding is like
Yeah.
half of the world should be rewilded, so it should be given back to nature. Well, Holland is very densely populated. If you want to give half of Holland back to nature, you need a lot of land.
Right.
And where can you get the land? Well, from the farmers.
Let me ask
What we want to
two
go.
things about this. First of all, is there a real environmental concern about nitric oxide, acidity, anything? I don't know. Is there something real there?
There's consensus about it
No,
among the
but
scientists. There is consensus about it among the scientists. So all the newspapers endorse the consensus, and all the politicians endorse the consensus. Because if you don't endorse the consensus like
Sure.
I'm doing, because together with a colleague, I spent 2 years looking into this. In 2015, 2017, we published even in a peer-reviewed journal about this. So before it became the crisis came after a court case, because environmental activists went to court and said the regulations are against the law. And then the court said, yes, you are right. And so then the whole nitrogen policy was removed by the court. And then we had a crisis, because suddenly, if you want to build a house or a new city, during the construction period, you have nitrogen emissions. And so you need a nitrogen permit to start building houses. And nowadays you cannot build houses because you cannot get a nitrogen permit. So this is the crisis. So
So there's
Holland
no
is
science. There's no science here at all.
there is some science, but it's really, really bad. It's even worse, I would say, than climate
Yeah.
science.
Okay. Now, just quickly, people will push back because they will say, fine, about the cows and the manure, but Holland is the second largest exporter of food in the world from tiny
Yes.
Holland, second only to the United States, which is 500 times bigger. And most of those factories producing food for export are just owned by private equity firms and financial companies. And so it's really all they're doing is turning, natural resources into money. And the people of Holland aren't benefiting except maybe some tax revenue or something. And so maybe there's some, so the pushback is that those people are taking profits at our expense because there is some environmental impact from all this tremendous agricultural stuff that we don't benefit from.
First of all, I would say that uh, I think close to all of these farms, production facilities are owned by the farmers themselves. They are not bigger companies. Of course, there are bigger companies like producing food for the cows or for the pigs or There are bigger companies, of course, in the sector, but the farmers themselves, they're close to all privately owned.
Huh.
And this happened after the Second World War, when we had this rebuilding of Europe. There was a strong push for bigger farms, and like in the US, bigger farms, more efficient production, because we never wanted to have hunger again, like we had in 1944. There was the hunger winter in Holland, and so we had a strong focus on food production. And maybe you can say that now you can say, okay, we went a little bit too far and we have a little bit too much production. But in my opinion, the normal way in a good society should be, okay, we want to scale down a little bit. In the coming decades, we want to scale down. So if you are a farmer and you have 2,000 pigs for consumption, and you want to stop with your farm because you don't have a son or daughter who want to take over the farm, we will help you to close the farm, and you can go into retirement, etc. This is the normal way to deal. But they decided we are going to go after them. We are going to give them regulation after regulation after regulation until they quit, you know, and they didn't do that because the farmers themselves, they simply love the farming. I remember National Geographic a few years ago, National Geographic, quite alarmist magazine normally. They had an article, "This tiny country feeds the world," you know. This was
Yeah,
about Holland.
right,
This tiny country
right.
feeds the world. And we are like brilliant in terms of efficiency. And I would disagree that we have a lot of environmental regulation. And I mean environmental pollution, air pollution in Holland is at an all-time low.
Yeah.
If you look at the concentration of sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, particulate matter, ammonia, it's at an all-time low. So it's crazy to talk about all this big environmental pressure.
So you don't have giant industrial production facilities of pigs and
Yes, we have in the western part of the country, in near Rotterdam, the harbor, we have a lot of refineries, oil refineries, and we have Tata Steel. It's a big steel company.
no, I
It's
mean
important
the
even.
farms, the giant farm, multi-story pig farms, and
No, we don't have.
you don't
No, we
have
we don't
big.
have those. No, we don't
Oh,
have those. So, I mean, of course, if you have pig farming or the farming for meat consumption is mainly taking place in staples, you know. And sometimes you can also ask questions about animal right issues,
sure,
etc. Is it really okay that a chicken lives for 6 weeks in
right.
such a building, a factory building, and then is killed and then is consumed? You can ask all kinds of questions, but on the other hand, as long as the consumers decide to buy this stuff, you can also say that there is a
Sure.
request, there is a demand for this kind of meat. And the problem is also, if we stop producing the meat in the Netherlands, where at least we have very strict regulations for and use of antibiotics. There's close to zero antibiotics
Mm.
in this branch. But if you import meat from Argentina, then
Yeah.
how much antibiotics is used there, so it raises all kinds of new questions if you stop producing in the Netherlands. Ukraine, we have a contract with Ukraine. You can start producing in Ukraine now, and then we import it into the Netherlands, and then what? Did we improve the environment? I don't know.
Right.
It's a very difficult issue.
Okay,
So
let me say thank you to Marcel Crok. Really appreciate your time today and your contribution, and everything you do is, you know, really critical. And I hope would be really great to find if we could maybe brainstorm or do anything to help you double your budget. It wouldn't be a lot of money, but it would be a lot to you.
yeah, well,
So
I would
anything we
appreciate,
can
yeah.
do to reach out to our friends anywhere to help Marcel, please, beat the drums and get the word out.
Yes. And
All
and
right.
and